Did you fear like the technology, or did you think this is disruptive and innovative, so therefore I'm excited, or what was your initial emotion?
I suppose, I don't fear it at all. It obviously will change the world, but with my historian perspective, it's like, bring it on.
Everything's
totally up for that.
Yeah.
I think, I'm really into anything that can do the heavy lifting so that humans have to do less robotic work and can do what we think we're better at, which I think is going to increasingly be the kind of human work. That a machine can be like a human, but it can't be a human.
It doesn't have a lived, embodied experience. Exactly, yeah. Hey everyone, welcome to the AI Canvas, the podcast that explores the impact of generative AI on businesses, the arts, and our everyday lives. I'm your host, David Foster, co-founder of Applied Data Science Partners and author of the book Generative Deep Learning, Teaching Machines to Paint, Write, Compose, and Play. Now, over the coming weeks, we'll be diving deep into fascinating conversations with a diverse range of thought leaders, including musicians, artists, journalists, educators, marketers, lawyers, and those at the cutting edge of this fascinating field. We'll explore their unique insights into the opportunities and potential threats of deploying this technology across industries and how it's going to reshape our world. We have a fascinating conversation ahead of us, so sit back, relax, and let's dive into the world of generative AI right here on the AI Canvas. So welcome back to the AI Canvas podcast. Really pleased today to be joined by a good friend and colleague as well, Tim Malbon, who is the founder of London-based digital design company called Made by Many. We've actually worked together in the past, Tim and I, so I can tell you firsthand that they are an amazing company. Definitely go and check them out. And I'm so excited today because we're going to be diving into everything to do with generative AI and its crossover with ESG, design, tech, the future, how it's going to impact our lives. So Tim, first of all, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. And I must say, I really enjoyed the project we did together as well. It's like David and Ross sort of sat right next to us with our teams, and we made some really cool stuff.
Yeah, we did. And
stuff that's ahead of its time. I was thinking, if you were to do that thing today, I'm not going to say who for or what it was, but it's not hard to imagine how you do it completely differently.
Yeah, and doesn't that just speak of the rapid rate of change we've seen over the last few years? I mean, it's crazy, but we're going to dive into all these things in this conversation. So let's start. If I just ask you a little bit to tell us about yourself, how you got to this point in your life, and how you're seeing the world at the moment.
Right. So first bit, I have a degree in history from Oxford, and obviously that doesn't really lead to many. I could have got into podcasting, I suppose. I didn't want to be a teacher. It's one of those generalist degrees, and I guess I fell in love with technology really quite early on, kind of sensing it was a new historical moment, and being very excited about the fact that it was like the printing press and the rise of the printing press and literacy, and here we are with like what felt like a completely new revolution that was going to level the playing field, and I was very excited by all of that in a historical way. So I've always imagined what I do actually now as kind of a future version of history, just a kind of continuum. But I started work, I think I did my first digital, I think I did my first website probably in 1997, and then made lots and lots of terrible things. Worked for a long time for a company called Interresource, which I can't spell that company. We used to get people going, "Hi, is that Intercourse?" But it was a very successful early doors digital agency beginning from 95, and we were incubating startups, but we were also building a lot of things with corporates, and we were doing joint ventures with the corporates as well. So it's very, very cool. Companies like Honda, London Stock Exchange, Telegraph, big kind of companies like that. And this was at the stage of the internet where we're still not really making digital advertising, which is good. So we're making tools. And so 2007, I was there until 2007. I became the creative director there, and it was kind of a crazy run company. And I decided that I just wanted to do more of that. And there was nothing else in 2007. There was no kind of digital product design companies to go to. They didn't exist. The only game in town really coming back after the dot-com bust was digital marketing. That's where people were making tons of money. So we basically had to start our own place, and that's why we started Made by Many. So together with a bunch of buddies, started Made by Many to try and make things that were useful, that got more useful over time, instead of having a kind of 2 to 6 week life cycle and being chucked in the bin and started over again,
Yeah.
that weren't simply about telling people things or communicating, but actually, delivered some deeper utility, a new relationship, the ability to manage a bank account or a portfolio, or I don't know, or even to publish live prices on the internet. All of those things were really exciting, kind of meaty challenges. It was about problem solving, not just in campaigns. And so that's where Made by Many came from. We actually started up in BBH in 2007, and we were there for 3 years. BBH is a big ad agency in London. And then we've been just up the road, as you know, in the studio on the Regent's Canal in Angel for the last 13 years. So we're 16 or 17 years old or something.
Yeah, amazing. And it's really interesting, the name of your company, Made by Many. There's real parallels there with some of the AI stuff that's happening now, because in many ways that has been also made by many. And I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on AI in general at the moment, and we can dig into aspects of that, but how are you seeing it at the moment?
Yeah. Well, the great thing about our name is that you can apply it to any milestone.
It's a great name.
You can retrofit it to anything. But I think you're right, and originally that came from the notion of like crowd power and being able to, I guess we were born very much as a product of that kind of social web moment. And that's kind of how I see this. I think that every few years the internet, the digital technology scene kind of baths up an interesting new technology.
Yep.
For us it was the social web, which we knew would change everything, so we dived into that. I think several years later we had the iPhone, and then we've had obviously lots of mini waves of this. I think that whole kind of Clubhouse audio community thing was kind of a mini wave, and then suddenly we are on here we are with Gen I, which is clearly going to change absolutely everything. It looks like it's the beginning of genuinely a completely new internet, not the kind of crypto sort of weirdness that we all thought was
NFTs.
Some people thought was the new internet maybe a year ago. I don't know, but that's kind of over. So I'm very excited. I feel like Made by Many is a company that inhabits this space between what's possible and what can be adopted right now, and then there's this. I've always been conscious of this wave of commoditization kind of following us, and it's always seemed to me a bit like kind of walking and then running up an escalator that someone is gently turning the speed up on, so you're having to run faster and faster and faster.
Yeah,
and
so I feel that too.
These moments where everything changes are so exciting, because suddenly Salesforce is not bearing down on you building new crap versions of the things that you had kind of invented 5 years ago.
Definitely.
They're kind of going a bit further. There's a bit more space, and so I'm very excited about that. I'm very excited about obviously, if you're interested in making things that are useful for people, here is a set of technologies that can take you beyond the kind of UI, the standard kind of UI, UX kind of paradigms that we got stuck in, and genuinely make things much more accessible, much more useful on a much more personal level.
Yep.
I think, I'm really into anything that can do the heavy lifting so that humans have to do less robotic work and can do what we think we're better at, which I think is going to increasingly be the kind of human work. A machine can be like a human, but it can't be a human.
It doesn't have a lived, embodied experience. Exactly, yeah. And what do you think separates you mentioned iPhone, social web, these watershed moments that clearly were going to have an impact from the moment they came out. What separates that kind of disruption from the things that have come and gone? Like you mentioned cryptocurrency there. Why do you feel that this is the former rather than the latter? Because
I think, I feel really mean picking on Clubhouse, but as I brought it up as an example, I guess it was kind of it wasn't something that was generally available over all channels, or you probably could get some level of experience of it. It was, I kind of think it sort of came out the mobile phone really.
And the pandemic, right?
And the pandemic as well. Lots of things happened there to change things too. But so I think when you think about the social web, you knew that it was going to affect, weirdly enough, banking right from day one. You knew it was going to affect. It was going to affect the way we even think about. It affects the way we even arrange to meet each other.
Yeah.
All of that kind of stuff. It turned out it affects the way people, fall in love and have children and all sorts of stuff. So you kind of knew that it was going to have profound, deep, long-lasting effects. I didn't feel that about Clubhouse. As good as it was, it just but it was still exciting. But this is exactly the same. I did feel that about the mobile phone. I did feel it about social web. I don't know how many of them are. What can you think of others that there are? Milestones that we could. I guess IoT was another kind of. But it's just there continuously. A lot of these build on top of each other.
Yeah, I mean, I think cloud computing would maybe be part of that list from a technological perspective, but maybe the everyday consumer didn't really notice the difference. They just saw things getting a lot easier and faster for them.
It's a brilliant metaphor. I do think AI can learn from that. It's like, I was talking about this with my wife, and neither of us really understand cloud computing. But I said to her, like, what do you think cloud computing is? She's like, well,
everyone just points out.
Everyone's fine with that.
Yeah, I remember my first days I used to work for Accenture, and one of the activities they got us to do was go around the room explaining to people what cloud computing was. And I think you heard about 10 different definitions there as you walk around. Let's talk about this generative AI revolution then. So, if we just talk briefly about the history of it, November 2022, not even a year ago yet. This thing called ChatGPT comes out, and this has been building for a while, but I think it's fair to say this was the watershed moment that put it into the public eye and was the starting gun. Did you play around with it immediately? Did it take
I did.
Yeah, and what did
played
you
around with it as soon as I could. It's incredibly powerful. I mean, one of the things I did with my history degree was become a copywriter on stage in the past. So, just purely looking at the kind of incredible kind of creative power of it to create words, and even if it's just a draft that you then look at, that was pretty spectacular.
Did you fear the technology, or did you think this is disruptive and innovative, so therefore I'm excited, or what was your initial emotion?
I suppose I don't fear it at all. It obviously will change the world, but with my historian perspective, it's like, bring it on. I'm totally up for that. I also think that humans go through this weird adoption curve. I imagine they did the same thing with fire. Where a lot of people got burnt for the first 1,500 years as well. We've got fire technology, and so it will take us a bit of time. We've actually done that with mobile phones. We've done it with the internet. We're using things to harm ourselves. But no, I was very excited to try it. I've been because of some friends who are much smarter and more into this sort of stuff than I am. I've been playing around with some GANs as well. And seeing what they could do. So it was interesting to see something that I could recognise as being useful much quicker and in many, many more ways, I suppose. And so, each of the new updates has been kind of exciting, and it's nice to be on a product upgrade path that you're genuinely excited about.
Yeah, 100%.
When was the last time?
Do you think businesses could learn a lot from how OpenAI rolled that out as well? Because it was a product that people could immediately use. There was no barrier to entry. The UX was simple.
I was going to ask you partly about that, because it's not, as far as I understand, it's not even the best one.
Right.
But it's definitely the one that's won the kind of marketing and rollout kind of wars.
For sure.
I don't know. What do you think?
I mean, they're certainly at the cutting edge of what's technologically possible. But I think what's interesting about them in comparison to Google, who've been very reticent, hesitant to put things out because of this thing,
just getting it out,
worried that it's going to become a weapon for people. Is OpenAI, I think, have taken the approach of we can only see if it's a weapon if we get it out there. How do we know how people are going to use it if it's just behind our four walls? And is that how you like to test products as well? Do you put stuff out there and see, or
I think so. I think obviously it would be probably harder for a company of the scale of Google to do that.
Right.
So that in a way was ChatGPT or OpenAI's kind of competitive advantage, I suppose, and they played it really well. Done a brilliant job on the actual experience of it as well. I think it's something that most people can do. Most people can get their heads on.
There's no user manual either.
No, exactly, which is brilliant. It just works. It uses some paradigms we're really familiar with. And I guess that's what it is, isn't it? It's a very neat layer on top of some really clever stuff that if we saw it, we'd probably run away crying and get really scared. It's really beautiful. You just type into it and it gives you stuff that you see, you value as an answer. So input, output, nicely disguised there. But like saying, I think we like to get stuff into the real world as fast as possible. I think, again, just to sort of divert onto that, I think if you think about how how these tools can help us to do that even quicker. It still takes time to do these things, but if you think about, I've been trying to work out, thinking about the whole end-to-end product design or innovation lifecycle, which bits, and that bit where we use a lot of sketching, so we do a lot of very visual work, it's very low fidelity, some sketches are like a little more than diagrams really. But as we bring things together through testing iteratively, or as we bring people into co-creation, we need to kind of spin things up to a high fidelity quite quickly. Something like computer vision that can generate, it's like slightly more understandable versions that are cleaned up, and that cycle time can be like instant.
Right. And also,
instead
you
of
don't necessarily
a week or 2 weeks or a sprint.
For sure. And this technical knowledge now is being shifted away from, can you just code up some boilerplate code to launch an MVP website, to all the higher order stuff.
Exactly. So it's not just what we can all do for our clients, but it's also how it affects our own, our own workflows and processes.
Yeah. Have you seen the new GPT-4V, which is the vision? I don't know if you've got it on your phone now. I
haven't got it on my phone. Do I want that? But
you can check it out. It's awesome.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that as well, because I saw something that literally blew my mind. And that's one of the exciting things about this. Like, you're regularly seeing things on Twitter and stuff. It's like, oh my God. What?
Did you see one? Just the sketch to website that someone just draws it out?
Well, I didn't do. It wasn't the sketch, but it's very similar. Someone showed it as SaaS dashboard.
Oh yeah. I saw this.
And it went away and coded it behind the scenes. I can't believe that's high quality code. There must be some, but conceptually you can see how far we've come very quickly, and how it won't be very difficult to optimize some of that stuff, especially when you look at the tools that are kind of helping really good coders to optimize what they're doing. It's like the knowledge is all there, it just needs to be linked up. So that is super exciting.
Yeah, definitely. And I think this stuff is going to become more multimodal, where we're talking not just about text to text, but we're talking about text to image blended with text to text, image to text. Everything is going to be mushed up into this one generalist agent, I think, that can just help you on whatever you need to do. So I wonder then, going back to the design and what it means for the future of design. How do you see this being rolled out into your processes at Made by Many? Like, is it something you think people will use every day, or do you think is it something that you'll go to for specific things, but ultimately it's just one tool in your toolbox? How do you see it?
Well, I think we'll have to try out lots of different things. We're already trying a few things out, but when I saw the thing about the ChatGPT vision thing, then going away and coding an application, I was pretty blown away by that, and immediately started thinking about. I mean, there are already Figma plugins, I think, that can do some of this, but in the kind of like the workflow that we have, I guess it's going to reduce the time between someone designing stuff in Figma. Figma is becoming much more of almost like a design ops piece of the kit built in, all of these processes are becoming more softwareized, I suppose, and more smart. And then if you sort of chuck in the ability to create code off the back of it like that, that's quite exciting. So put that alongside something that someone else told me the other day that they're doing in their company as a startup, and he's the head of product, and I won't tell you who it is or what it is or anything, but he was saying it's changed the nature of the discussions he's having with developers. So with his product kind of strategy and hat on, he's quite often in the past will come up with some sketches and some notes, and then go and beg for some developer to listen to him, and try and kind of convey what he's thinking about.
Ticket sizing, and
exactly, and it's all about tickets and sprints and stuff like that, and that's okay. But what he can do now is he can, actually do some kind of basic algorithm stuff himself, and then start writing some Python scripts. He's got a little bunch of stuff to go and take to a developer, which really fundamentally changes the nature of the conversation. Because the developers, obviously, we've got two different types of minds here, but I think it brings them closer together.
It does,
and that's
for sure.
Quite incredible. It's a cultural impact. In terms of the way these kind of cross kind of functional disciplines that we all kind of need to work with. These sort of teams are going to be able to work better, I think.
Coding is definitely the one area I think is going to have a huge impact. I think that Tim Malbon as well has said the same, that he feels like that is the one place that we've always used code as this proxy for talking to a computer. That's always been the problem, that you've got to learn this secondary skill before you actually can get to do what you want to do, which is build a product. And it's shortcutting and short-circuiting that relationship, and I think it's really hard for people to adapt to that in many ways, because they're still in the old mindset of, okay, we've got to build an old-fashioned team where we've got our development team, we've got our product team, and the two meet at meetings and discuss how ticket sizing works. But what if that could be all short-circuited and everyone's just part of the same team of inventors and designers and creators? That's really exciting, I think.
So a lot of the stuff that came out, I suppose, around lots of kind of image manipulation, Gen AI stuff. There was a lot of stuff about how it looked like it was going to make designers obsolete. And only a very narrow type of designer who I don't have any kind of contact with actually. But yes, I can understand that. Kind of creating weird new dreamscapes and stuff.
Exactly.
New art. But that's actually it feels the opposite. It feels like you say, the developers are the ones that got to be worried about this. Which I think is comforting. I think I'm guessing that we'll see really great developers being able to concentrate on higher order of issues and to orchestrate what they're doing with designers in a much more joined up way, which is, I guess it's always been the goal. So if that's what happens, that's brilliant. But I think it will take people a bit of time to get their heads around it. I don't know. I mean, you guys are very kind of oriented on AI as a thing, but I think a lot of this stuff in companies that have a broader set of disciplines inside them are, I think there are people who are quite resistant to this in those organisations, especially slightly older people. The same guy I was talking to was saying that the younger people in his team have just been really up for adopting it.
For sure.
And all the older people going, whoa, hallucinations. You can't replace our genius human brains.
Right.
And I'm going like, you're right and you're wrong, but let's do a test. So they did a test, and it was something like they can get to 65 to 75% of the output, roughly, by doing it that way, but they can do much more of it all the time, and it doesn't replace the other bit. You can do that on top. So net, it's a big game.
I've seen this as being something as well. For me, it raises the average. That's what it's doing. And I think it's important to differentiate that from the true leaps of genius that I think are still very much human. And that, if I think about how I'm using it to get to beyond average quicker. And then I can add, our team's unique spark on top of that. And that is where I think this is going to be really important, is that it's no longer, you can't produce below average stuff now, because it's just, the AI is doing such a good job of it in many cases. It's silly things like proposal writing, or being able to talk to, somebody in a professional manner in an email. There's no longer a barrier to entry to be really good at that. So I think that's a really interesting way of thinking about it.
I'm using it to get just up to average.
To be honest with you, like some days you wake up and you think, I'll be happy if I'm if I break into that mindset of average today. Cool. So maybe let's just talk about where this all might lead. And I think one of the interesting things, personal sort of interest of mine is education. And I used to be a teacher, and I sort of think back to those days and think, how would I have done things differently if I'd have been in the classroom with this at my disposal, and having the ability to give children that personalised touch to their learning. Just maybe could you give us a few thoughts on how you might think this will impact not just education, but also people coming into the job market, junior designers or junior developers, because that's where they're going to be growing up with this tech in school. So it's not new to them, it's just something they've always had. So maybe just give us your thoughts on that.
A couple of things. One is, it's clear that kids get education in quite different ways. So as you and I know from working on that pitch that we did, there's a bunch of private schools who are kind of racing ahead into the future and using AI and digital technology in classrooms in a way generally that's much more sophisticated, and I can see that working really well. In my own life, I have a 14-year-old and a 7-year-old, and I'm very interested in education as well, and what technology can do. And I think one of the things I loved about the internet to start with was you can get any knowledge, because growing up outside London, you basically had to wait till a magazine arrived to get some new knowledge about something, and then, like suddenly as a young person,
the monthly edition,
exactly, or you had to order it and it would take 3 months. But looking at my son, if he finds a new I don't know, if a new jazz musician that he's interested in, he can literally consume all of that jazz musician stuff and learn everything there is to know from critics, and like he can extract the information. He can like literally feast on it, which is brilliant. Obviously applied to education, you can learn all sorts of different things like that, and I think through people's lives in training and having a continuous kind of understanding of where you are in a subject or an area or a new skill, or maybe a skill that you don't have yet but you want to gain. Your relationship with learning can be much more continuous and can probably be quicker and more effective at learning. The first thing I did with ChatGPT was actually to create a revision guide for him. So he's very, won't surprise you to know, he's also into history. I haven't hot-housed him, it's not like that. But
history's cool, to be fair.
If he doesn't, he's really cool. I don't know why I'm apologising for it. But, history lends itself pretty well to this.
It does, yeah.
And so, if you look at what they're supposed to learn by a certain point in the curriculum, and then you basically, you look at the way that the papers are scored, or marked, you can kind of reverse backwards into really good little like questions that you then use ChatGPT to turn into things that he can use, like a cribbing list. I mean, the way I used to revise was to write everything down and make diagrams of it, or cartoons, and then gradually distill it down to like a bunch of symbols on a piece of paper. But ChatGPT can do all of that really, really easily. So anything that's about making lists, that make sure that you're focusing on areas, because I'd be testing him, so I know which of these questions is weaker or not, and you can just then get another question. I think doing stuff like that would be really amazing. At the other end of the spectrum, I also, like a lot of parents in Britain, am paying money for private tutoring. We've got, I think people in Britain pay almost 10 billion
that's a huge industry,
or dollars for private tutoring.
Really? Yeah. Wow.
£50 an hour, and every middle class parent every parent who wants their kids to do well, especially where they don't have all of the advantages of people in the private sector, they're obviously paying this, and they'd like to pay more. I think the only thing limiting them from getting more tutoring is the price. Yeah. So I'm thinking about stuff that you can do with like a synthetic human or like a bot that maybe the child can even customise. I think it'd be really interesting to see what it's like at different ages, because I think there's potentially a Roblox version of this for younger kids. Yeah. I mean, my youngest one wants to spend nearly all his life in Roblox. Right. Yeah, so why not create some virtual tutors that he can try?
Make it useful.
I mean, he's built a gym. Yeah. He's charging people to use gym equipment. He's upgrading the gym. Why not make that about maths? Or English or something? And so that's just going to be brilliant. And it's like, you can already see that in the way they use games. I think a lot of the same mechanisms for learning things. I was going to learn how to do things that are academic instead of just stealing cars and machine gunning people.
Yeah, exactly. Well,
it'd be nice.
This is the crux of it, though, isn't it? Because it's about how do we get children and young people to use this tool constructively without just seeing it as a shortcut to the answer. Yeah. Because that's where we lose all ability to call ourselves human. If we suddenly start handing off and delegating to AI for everything, that for me is not the answer, and the teaching needs to happen to understand how do we, and also we need to work this out as the adults in the room here. How do we show children the right way to use this tech?
It's difficult to know where to draw the line though. We've already decided, we've already given up on a lot of things that profoundly human things. Just like, I don't know, when you met your wife, did you meet her through online somewhere?
No, actually in person.
Yeah, me too.
I don't think I have the courage these days to talk to her, but there we go.
But that's the interesting thing. It's like when you met someone in meet space in the old days, you literally had to get the courage up to walk over and say something embarrassing to them. And you were literally you were out on a limb, and they could make you feel terrible, and you had to risk everything in that moment. It wasn't just like
and try 100 different messages.
I'm not saying it's better or worse, but I'm just saying we've already gone quite a way down this world of letting technology do a lot of these things for us. So I don't know. I know we're supposed to be the adults in the room, but I wonder if actually it will be all we can do is try and make sure our kids have decent values so they can make better decisions.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know.
But
telling them what to do will seem to be almost the opposite to what they'll eventually do.
Yeah, and they'll probably figure this out for themselves.
I think they have to, don't they?
Maybe it will come down to the fact that if everyone's got AI, they're no longer special if they can just use the AI to get the answer, because everyone can do that. To be special, you need to learn how to use this thing to unblock your own understanding. Yeah. Because, I mean, believe it or not, there will be times in our lives where we don't have access to these tools. If we're having this conversation now, I'm not responding to you as a result of typing in your comment to my AI assistant, although, to be honest, that would make my life as the podcast host a lot easier, maybe. But you have to think of interesting things to say on the spot. And I think, in job interviews, for example, that they'll need to be able to talk fluently. Yeah. So there's certainly a role still for independent thought and not just using it as a crutch.
At least for this year.
Yeah, exactly, until it gets really good.
One thing I found really exciting, in a dangerously stupid way, I think, but I was looking at some of those videos about the evolution of AI from today to the year 3000 plus. And one of them had the idea that, AI is obviously going to create its own internet and it's going to need more power than we have on Earth and all that kind of stuff. But one of the fascinating ideas was large areas of the Earth have been set aside to have no AI in them. So like national parks or like technology-free zones where human beings go, in this idea, human beings go there to live kind of fantasy feudal lives or pre-technology lives, which is kind of interesting. Yeah, so like a retreat or
blackout zones where it's just
Mennonites or something.
Yeah, and everyone sits around the campfire singing and stuff like they used to.
A holiday from AI.
Yeah, well, I think we'll see more of that. I mean, the parallel would be people in their jobs used to do a lot of manual labour, and so people didn't go to the gym. They didn't need to because they were working 10-hour days down a mine or something. Yeah. And then the gym industry has sprung up, I think, in part because of this lack of physical exercise that we all get in our day jobs.
Maybe going to get even worse.
Even worse, or mental gyms, or people need that mental stimulation because there's so much of our work is being handed off to an AI system. I don't know.
The film WALL-E got so much right.
What was that?
WALL-E.
I haven't seen that. No.
Yes, you have. It's a little Disney WALL-E.
Oh, WALL-E. I have. I've seen
all the people who got so fat they could. They go into. They destroyed their own planet. They have to go into space and. They have to go around on wheels.
Maybe we're not so far from that, but that is an interesting idea, and I think maybe this will be in part driven by the tech companies, but also what children have to say about how they want their future to look like, because it's important we give them hope to see that there is a reason to maintain independent thought and maintain your own point of view and have all of these softer skills as well, not just being able to write an essay well. Maybe we need different ways of testing and different ways of evaluating how capable a student is, for example.
Yeah, well, I was wondering, it was one thing I wanted to ask you about was, the kind of the co-creation that we've done before with the customers that we worked with before, or the kids that we work with when we were designing Hackaball. Are there any programs that you've come across where kids are actually doing design, or they're coming up, they're using AI, they're getting taught it at a ridiculously early age?
I think what I've seen
to do kind of co-creative stuff.
Yeah, I certainly haven't seen that as a product. What I've seen is that there are the generalist products that are out there, like ChatGPT, Midjourney for image generation. They're so generalist that you can use them for that purpose if you want to. But I think there is a space out there, and there is a company out there that will be built, I'm sure.
Like the scratch of AI.
Just how do you use this tool, and it's baked into everything that the tool is about to co-create, but also it could be, for example, around learning, going back to that, the idea that you've got your own personal assistant that understands how your mind works and can really sort of explain a concept to you at the level at which you're at, if you're trying to learn a new concept or a new skill. But there are going to be a number of startups springing up in this space, obviously, and your experience with accelerators and startups, you've seen this all before, I'm sure, with Booms and how the companies that
succeed. So that's a very interesting because they've always got all the same problems that we had before, especially as most of our work is actually for corporates.
Right.
So I do think there's probably a risk that this is like just the new shiny thing, and when you see the stats about how many projects are getting signed off that
Yeah.
have got the words Gen AI.
Large language model.
It's a spell, and it is kind of a spell. And we've been through this before. I mean, it's. I worry. I think it's potentially actually talking to people. It has allowed again that kind of senior stakeholder issue that sometimes get hippo. Maybe they've read about how incredibly mindlessly easy it is to build these sorts of things in a magazine, on a plane sometime, and then they land, they've got a bunch of ideas,
and
so they come in and it's like actually the underlying kind of barriers and frictions to making great products are still there. And
definitely.
It's really, really hard to make things that people really need that you can then add to and kind of increasing their utility and their and their desirability over time. It's really difficult. So actually it's probably even more difficult because you're just adding a new complexity into it all. So if you haven't worked out how to do all the bits and pieces, how it all fits together, I mean, maybe that Gen AI can help us do all of that as well. I think it probably can.
You can go down the rabbit hole with it and just
You can, there are definitely bits where, I mean, which bits do you think it's not good at?
Well,
out of the product process, likely to not be good at.
I think the thing that we mentioned right at the beginning, the idea that this system hasn't had an embodied experience. So actually, it's everything to everyone, but also kind of nothing. And I think that sometimes having, and we've seen this actually with our testing that we've done on products that we've been building, telling people that they're talking to AI increases their likability of it tenfold. If the user thinks they're talking to a human but it's actually AI, they feel a bit fobbed off. And so there is something there, isn't there, around like, why is that? Why do we feel uneasy about talking to something that's AI? And I think it's the fact that it hasn't. We feel a little bit like, well, we've had to do my 34 years of lived experience, and I've got to this point in my life. Do you think you're the expert now? Just having a training set and being trained for a bit of time from OpenAI. So we feel almost like a bit I don't know, a bit like this thing has just come in and pretended to be the expert at a subject, whereas actually I want to be talking to another human who's had my experience. Same for art as well. Like the reason why we like art sometimes isn't just the image; it's the fact that artist has spent 6 months of their life doing it, or a lifetime learning the skill. So I think that's what it can't replace. Music is the same.
Totally. I think that's behind one of the other big doubts I have about it. I mean, a lot of companies just rely, for example, on automated testing to do everything, and we don't believe that is enough because automated tests don't capture the emotional empathy type. We didn't get to that level of understanding whether this works or not. So we have a human AI, a QA, sorry, a human AI. That's a good idea, isn't it? and we give them a bunch of tools, but effectively the final hurdle is like, did it work for a human? And so, like sort of getting rid of that or giving someone authority, giving an AI authority to do that is quite interesting. I'm not sure up for that. That feels wrong, but I can see how companies want to save money, and so there's another risk there. Another one is virtual kind of humans doing. So the same guy I was talking about was telling me about they built a panel of 500 synthetic humans that represent their customer base. So effectively, it's 500 personas.
Right. Okay. All with different personalities.
And they then get them together and do workshops with them.
Really? Wow.
And I was like, what? That sounds insane.
Yeah.
But I guess one of the things that we think people often get wrong is they use data at the beginning of like looking for opportunities, but it's often market research data, and it's very old, and it's very like here's segmentation. It's like that is not enough to build new product propositions off or to use as a springboard for coming up with ideas. Mainly because it's a backwards looking view. It's like trying to drive into the future whilst looking in the rear view mirror. It's historical data. But Gen AI, the way it's predictive, makes me interested and optimistic to think that perhaps, I mean, you can see it will come up with like some things that will actually be genuinely creative. Yeah, I mean, it feels a little bit like almost a simulation of the experiment before you actually run it. And by all means, I think that will get you maybe 70% towards the truth. Well, it might help you ask the right questions. And decide here's 10 things we want to test. Because we've rinsed it through our 500 synthetic human group. Which is quite exciting. Have you heard of anyone else doing that?
Do you know what an interesting statistic is that obviously ChatGPT is the most commercially used, but when I say commercially, so I mean consumer product, Gen AI product that's been of recent times. The second is a company called Character.ai, and it is a personal. If you want to talk to an AI person, and you want that person to be what you wanted to tell it to, what you want it to be, it's a company that basically allows you to spin up these agents that you can chat to.
Wow.
So I think in many regards their target market is people who are lonely and don't have someone real to speak to, and I think that's being used in that way a lot. But like you said, there's other commercial applications. There's other ways that these things could be used for product market fit, or or debating as well. Like tell me why I'm wrong about a particular subject. Like spin me up an agent that can be the most obnoxious person I could possibly be selling to.
Absolutely.
And testing on that.
So I'd like to see if we could create some sort of co-creation workshop. Can we do literally? Can you get them to do sketches? How far can you take this?
That's exactly. And those businesses, I'm sure, will be being built right now. That's the sort of thing that's not difficult to certainly see happening. But it's just whether we can get over that mental barrier of it being AI, and it goes back to this idea of, do we really care? I think we do.
I think we do, but the example you just gave of loneliness, that's like, of course you care, you probably trade up to a human. Yeah. But if you don't have one...
Is it better than nothing?
Better than nothing. And I think the other use case like that, which I think is really interesting, and I'm personally excited by, is mainly because I'd like to do this with my mum and dad, the same way people went and filmed them talking about their life experiences, but actually creating a simulation of them where I can have a chat with them. I know that sounds ridiculous, but I can see that being so popular. It's one of those, if you don't have access to that person, it's it's a great thing to have.
That's a really interesting idea.
You can talk to them about all their memories. You can put all the family photos. They can know everything about. I mean, it's basically all they know anyway at the end of their lives.
Yeah. If you rewind that back, imagine that you could talk to someone who was your ancestor 500 years ago. If that technology was invented 500 years ago, you would want that product today. Yeah. For sure, because you could see what they were like. I mean, I know some of my ancestors were criminals, for example. They had. In newspapers being committed, and it'd be great to speak to them and say, why did you do that?
100%.
Like, what was the thinking? Amazing.
I think you've talked to a genealogy service as well. I think
I used to work for a genealogy company. Yeah.
So one of the things I found interesting about that, you've seen those guys, I think called DID or something.
Yes. Yeah, for sure.
And so they've been doing some really interesting things with old photos. But when you see a family tree, you've got like typically colour photos down here, the black and white photos, and then you've just got face outlines going back to the beginning of time. But surely it's possible to look at all of the photos. If you've got enough photos of the generations of everyone down here, to auto-generate faces into the back and literally know everything. It wouldn't even matter if they don't look like that, because frankly, who's going to tell?
For sure.
That's the best rendering we have of them. And it's at least based on something.
And you could probably inject some of the cultural fashion of the day.
You should have some big oil paintings of your criminal forebears and stuff around
Scars
here.
All over his face. Maybe that's.
Do you know what crimes, by the way?
I think one of them is like trespassing. So we're talking about like serial murder. Trespassing, shoplifting or something.
Shoplifting.
It was back in the times were hard for my family back in the day.
Sorry to laugh.
We weren't aristocracy. Living off the scraps. That's a great idea. Maybe that's a good way as well to think about this technology, is to think, what do I wish my ancestors had access to 200 years ago that I would now find useful.
I think that's a really good way of putting it. I was thinking of the frame, what's a magic utility or a magical utility? Because those are the two things. One's a bit boring but necessary. The other one is like a awe. And I think it's a great way, because I think the iPhone was like that. And I think social is like that in the sense that you're connected to everyone like some weird sort of ESP, like magic. And I think that's another way in which Gen AI is like those other things. I mean, you couldn't really say Clubhouse is like magic.
No, right.
The magic already existed. But this is like magic. It
definitely
gives you stuff that you couldn't believe. Like, how did that happen? And, it's beyond most people's minds. I started trying to read your book yesterday, by the way.
Is that magic?
It's a lot of it's just pure magic to me. It's like I looked it up online, and it's like it was recommended as one of the top 5 books for people trying to We didn't sort this out before.
That's good to hear. I'm glad you said that.
But the top 5 books for people who, who want to kind of understand the space.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't say who can also do software development.
Oh.
Maybe it should do.
Yeah, exactly. It's for the technical reader, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But people always ask me, did you use ChatGPT to write it? And I said,
you did it too early.
Yeah, it came out well before that. And I had to write about ChatGPT in the book. But
you've done version 2 though?
Yeah, version 2 came out in
2?
May. Funnily enough, the writing process has to finish so far before it's published because it has to go through so many different steps of publishing, proofreading, checking, typing. It goes to go to the printers, the images have to be redrawn. That you've got to finish writing about 3 months before it's published.
Right.
3 to 4 months, I think. So the deadline was like December.
Yeah.
So this thing, and then I was like, oh my god, literally the whole world has changed overnight. And then suddenly I had to write like about 5 new chapters.
It's better for the fact it's human.
Yeah, I think so. That's what I keep telling myself. Although it would have been easier, I think, that's for sure. But this is it. It's about not starting with a blank page. And the reason actually you couldn't use generative AI to write a current up-to-date book is because obviously the training data only goes up, I think, ChatGPT to January 2022. So it doesn't even know about the whole history of how you got there.
Yeah. Why is that, by the way? I'm just going to ask a stupid question. Is it because you get people making bets and doing all sorts of crazy stuff with knowledge?
No, there's a few reasons. One reason is because OpenAI has to do this thing called red teaming of the model before it goes out.
Right.
And that takes quite literally months to do that because they have to... The model is trained and the training process is finished. We're using data up until as current as it's got.
Right.
But then there's so long before you can actually release this into the public that they've got to make sure that it's safe. They can't just be like, we finished training, now put it live.
Yeah.
It's not like that kind of product. So that's partly the reason. They have updated, I think it used to be like September 2021 and it's now 4 months into the future. Okay. And you can bet that GPT-5 is being trained right now and it might have already finished training, we don't know. Yeah. But they won't release that model until they've tested it. And that's probably for the best of it, for the best really, because obviously you don't want this thing being able to be hacked or used for nefarious means. We talked about loads in this conversation. I think we're probably getting to the end of our time, unfortunately. We've probably got so many more things we could discuss.
I'm sure.
But let's finish with maybe a look to the future. Where do you think, if we sat down in 10 years' time and did this podcast again, what would we be talking about? Would we still be talking about how generative AI is, like the iPhone, created a revolution and now it's a commodity that everyone's used to? What do you think is going to be the 10-year outlook of this thing? Will AI have taken over?
So I read a really good phrase the other day. It's my new maxim, which is hope without optimism. And my hope is that we'll have generally harnessed AI and a lot of computing power to solve many of the world's problems. I think we've got to, the green transition is really, really important. I think it's, you can't have a green transition without digital transformation. People still catching up on that. This is now just part of all of that. I really hope we'll have found a way to use technology to fix all the things we've done with technology. So use a bit more technology.
Get it right the second time around.
Exactly.
Yeah, and that, just to kind of cover off on that, because that is a whole can of worms we could talk about. But this idea that there's two real 2023 has been about two things. It's the climate change crisis has suddenly reared its head like never before and is continuing to do so. But also AI, and they are almost at opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of AI needs lots of power, compute, water, energy, and then you've got ESG concerns of companies and worried about is climate change our new catastrophic thing that's going to come and be the end of the world. And do you see them as competing, or do you think that there is common ground that they can find that AI could help us solve some of the problems that
they are definitely competing for energy resources, aren't they?
And mental capacity of the world's leaders.
Oh my God, we're already suffering from that. I think we can't. One of the things I think is a bit dishonest about the way especially our politics works is people don't want to tell you that you can't carry on doing all the things we're doing and do all the things we want to do and solve the world problems and stuff like that. So we'll have to, like I say, I'm an optimist, and I guess I hope that people's behaviour will change to some extent. I think it might take some more horrible weather events and terrible things to happen, but I think we've always used technology in the past to solve problems. We're quite good at eventually resolving technology into really good solutions.
Yeah.
And it does take all of us coming together to do that. But we do that again and again and again over the long course of human evolution and history. So I think that's what my hope would be. But again, I like to be optimistic, but I don't know how much optimism I actually have.
I mean, it's Sam Altman, in fact, his two big bets are energy from fusion and also...
Yes, that's a good point. Yeah.
AI, there is two things. So, I think he thinks of them as going hand in hand. Because
AI going out and building a Dyson sphere.
Yeah, exactly.
That might be a bit too far.
Yeah, stick it around the
Have you heard of the phrase, the shittening?
I haven't, but I've got some ideas about what it might be.
So it's a friend came up with this, a guy called Ian Tate, and he's like, basically it's like the quickening, but everything's getting shitter.
Yeah, right.
And so I think we're still in the shittening curve.
Yeah.
And hopefully, I mean, these things are cyclical, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely.
They are, aren't they, David?
Yeah, there are. There's theories around that, isn't there? That the world goes in these peaks and troughs.
Generally.
You can't really avoid them. So I think we're heading towards a peak, if I'm not mistaken. We've got to be right. Yeah.
Coming from a low base.
Yeah, it's true. Well, Tim, thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's been really fun.
Great, thanks very much, and all the best for your future work at Made by Many.
Well, yes, and also some more collabs.
Yes, for sure. Yeah.
Right.
Thanks for listening, and join us next time for more interesting conversations on generative AI.
Cheerio.
Thanks.